Hi, welcome to our talk. You can play HyperDot with one now. It is a talk on HyperDot and how we kind of stumbled into the accessibility nature of the game and how we reached out to the A11Y community and we were able to work on adding in a lot more accessible features and shape the game in that regard. My name is Charles McGregor. I am the sole developer and founder of Tribe Games. Uh, I have been making games since I was 11 years old, so a while now. But I've been doing it professionally for the last 4 to 5 years, give or take. So I've been working on various different projects, ranging from games on mobile to games like on VR and things, to my latest release, HyperDot. So HyperDot is a action arcade game where you dodge everything. Um, you play as a dot and you have to avoid all the different shapes that are on the arena. Um, you There are tons of different ways that you can change the game up called modifiers, which I'll get into a little bit later. But for as an overview, you can have different modifiers be like change the player's speed or the size. You can change the arena itself, so you can have a dark arena where you can't see everything around you, or an ice arena where you can't stop moving. So there's tons of different ways that the game can be changed in that regard. And then other spiel bullet points are that there are over 100 single player campaigns. There's a multiplayer mode, and then there's also a level editor, so you can make your own levels. So HyperDot had two key design pillars that really help shape the rest of the game from the get-go. And they were super useful for making different decisions and things, as well as it kind of helped allow me to stumble more into the accessible nature of the game. So the two pillars are minimal and then flexible, making it breaking that down a little bit more. Um, Minimal is more about like the art style, the controls, and the mechanics. And in this talk's instance, really focusing in on the controls and mechanics. There is only one mechanic that you have to worry about, which is move. That is the main and primary mechanic, and the main and primary control that you have to worry about, which is extremely useful for helping out in terms of flexibility. Um, but flexibility originally manifested with being flexible with controllers, being flexible with modifiers, as I mentioned earlier, and then being eventually it was also being flexible with a in-game level editor. So the controllers piece when I initially started was not necessarily in terms of like being having it so that everybody could be able to play the game. It was more for the convenience of different controllers that you might have. So say you were playing on computer, you're on your PC and whatnot, and you plug in an Xbox controller. I wanted to have it so that all the prompts would show, okay, you're using Xbox controller, we'll show all Xbox prompts. So ABXY, we're going to say LBRB, things like that. If you had a PS4 controller and you plugged it in, then I would be like, oh, you have a PS4 controller. I'm going to show you all those different prompts. And hey, I also have access to using tilt functionality in your game, in your controller, and things like that. So making it so that it's more tailor made for whatever controller you plug into it, or if you say had like a Microsoft Surface tablet or something like that, you would be able to use touch and be like, oh yes, so you want to use your touch or you want to use your Surface Pen, no problem. You'll be able to play the game just using that. And because the controls were so simple, it is quite literally just move. There's no other additional controls that you have to worry about. It's just movement. I'm able to be this flexible with controllers, but that was really the original intent. Was that I was able to like work with multiple different types of controllers and things, and actually none of that would have been uh, even the thought of without the plugin that I was using for Unity called Rewired, which I could shout accolades and praise all day. But none of that really would have even like manifested or even been a thought um, without that plugin. But it was really about the convenience of it all, and then making sure that like, oh, if you do have one of these things, I want to make sure that I can give you your full experience or experience that you really liked with the controllers. And then the other one that we're going to be talking about a lot is the modifiers. And originally, the modifiers were mainly for allowing the player to change the levels to be however they want. When I originally started, there was no single player campaign. It was just a free play arcadey kind of thing. So try and survive for as long as you can. And having in modifiers where you're able to make it so that players are twice as big and the arena is twice as small, and you have to collect different tokens in order to win. Like being able to have it so that the players can do all that choice. That is where that flexibility, the flexibility pillar really leaked into and crept its way into the design and such. And again, I'll touch on editor a little bit. The editor, I wanted to make sure that everything that I did make, the players could make. And I originally wasn't planning on doing an in-game level editor, but having it so that there are a lot of different, or having 100 different levels can kind of influence you to want to make some type of in-game level editor so you can do testing and things like that. But yeah, those two different pillars really did influence a lot of the design, and because of these two different pillars, it really did lean itself super well into making it so that I could I kind of stumbled into like, oh, it's because it's super simple mechanics, and oh, because I support a wide variety of controllers. Some of the design is super useful. I guess a little to touch a little bit on the art style as well. Sorry about jumping around here, but the UI and the presentation of it, I really didn't want to have like a lot of information going on at once, and I wanted it so that if you took a screenshot of the game, you would be able to tell what's going on, and that was one of my original goals. But because of that, that makes it really easy and really accessible in order to get into. So there's a lot of that kind of stumbling into it, and not necessarily that's my original intent, but because of the nature of it, it really did lean itself to be pretty well. So when I first started out doing a lot of these like tests and things, when I was trying to get feedback on the game and such, I started out as many indie developers start out with. I bugged family and friends. I was saying like, hey, can you try out this level real quick? Fortunately, levels don't take that long to test out. They take levels are like 30 seconds. So I'm able to say, hey, can you try this out? And then for like a minute and a half, they'll try and attempt at beating this level and such. So that's super useful for really quick feedback and things. But I wasn't getting like super in-depth feedback. Fortunately, there was a local community called Glitch that had a playtest where I was able to go to a playtesting event where people from the community can bring in their games, and we're able to like showcase and get feedback from others to come in and test the games and such. So that was super useful for me to actually have not super formal, but it was still I'm getting like more feedback in a more controlled environment, and it definitely helped shape the game. In fact, the game probably wouldn't have even continued going without Glitch's playtest, because the game originally started out as a school project, and then I brought it to a playtest, and people there encouraged me to keep working on it, and I really like doing working on it. So I continued working on it there. The other place where I was getting some testing in was showcasing at conventions. Yes, I was doing, I was trying to market the game and be like, hey, check out HyperDot. At the time, it was called Anti-Piracy. But I did a lot of like testing as well, looking at people's reactions and things like that. Is this game too hard? Are people checking in or like checking out halfway through playing the game, things like that. Just so really non-informal ways of um, ways of trying to do the testing things in all of the scenarios. So that was what I was able to do on my own. I was alone doing all this kind of stuff, and I was just again trying to reach out with friends and family, and like reaching out with the community and things. But there was no formal process. But that all kind of changed when the local community that I was going to reached out, and we struck a chord and were able to collaborate and work together. And Glitch then became my publishers. And one of the great things about them is that they are super into trying to do data and user testing. And that kind of shifted my focus on making sure that, like, oh yeah, let's make sure that the game is good from like a difficulty standpoint, and things like that. Again, not necessarily starting out with accessibility in mind, but really becoming more aware of like the different things that the game can or can't be doing. So I did some formal test, or we started to do some more formal testing. Nicholas was able to actually documented all of the different things inside of each level, which is something I never actually did. I was just making levels, and I had a general idea of like, oh, okay, I know what's in this level, and I know how I want the level progression to go. But all the different single player levels, I didn't actually have a systematized, like, okay, this has this has that, this is you doing that, and this is the goal. And Nicholas was able to do that, which is super, super useful to actually see and break that down. So that helped with difficulty progression and testing that out, which was actually one of the things that we discovered later on, was that like some of the like difficulty spikes and difficulty in general is so subjective. What somebody considers difficult could for them could be easy for someone else, vice versa. So there is a lot of just trying to figure out, okay, what exactly do we actually have, and how do we make it so that we can provide a smoother experience and an easier gambit of ways of doing that. So actually, one of the ways that I originally did before meeting up with Glitch was that I was intending on having it so that you unlocked the levels in blocks, the single player levels in blocks. So you just had to beat 4 levels, and then you would unlock the next 5 levels, and then you just need to unlock or beat another 4 levels, and you'd unlock the next set of 5 levels. That way, you only really needed to play through 80% of the game in order to unlock all of the different levels. But if you were struggling on something, you can skip something and move on to the next one. And I didn't want to add in like this. Add in a button or some type of prompt that said skip this level, because I know that a lot of players would be stubborn, myself included, would be stubborn. I'm like, oh no, I have to beat this. But having that feature in there without explicitly saying it was something that I wanted to do. So after doing more formal tests with Glitch, we were able to, we got a lot more feedback and a lot more encouraged on like, hey, this game is actually fairly accessible in nature inherently, and that I was discovering that already, but it wasn't really something that I was leaning into until really collaborating with Glitch and various opportunities showing up, where I was able to be like, oh, hey, yeah, this is actually something that I can do to really push for and make the game even more accessible, and not just have it be like, oh yes, it's passively like that, or it's like a footnote, but an actual bigger portion of the game. This kind of all stemmed back from that first, or the pillar that I was talking about with flexibility and controllers. One year one of my friends won a Tobii eye tracker, which is a device that goes on the bottom of your monitor or somewhere on your monitor, and it will track where your eyes are looking. And that way you will be able to interact with your screen using just your eyes. One of my friends was jokingly saying like, "Hey, you should hook up HyperDot with that." Um, and then after joking around a little bit, I was like, "Hey, maybe I should do that." Um, and then 3 hours later, fortunately, it was super smooth and easy. Again, based off of those minimal controls, I was able to have HyperDot working with eye tracking, and I was testing it that night. Um, so again, I had originally intended it to be a novel feature, like, oh, this is more of a novel. Like you'll play the game, you'll play the game with this for like, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, and then you'll move on and switch over to like a traditional controller or something like that. But really, it wasn't until this stage where I was more encouraged on leaning into this that I was like, oh wait, well, what if you what if you had like a motor disability and you couldn't hold a controller? Um, because this feature is in the game, you're able to, or there, those would be able to play the game using just your eyes, and that kind of like sparked an idea of like having it so like, oh, what if we add in more features that make it even more accessible for players and things like that. And I'm sure Nicholas will talk more about the culmination of the eye tracking in particular, but it was really an eye-opening experience to like hear and get encouraged by various partners, various friends and family, players, and Glitch itself, to be like, hey, you should lean more into the fact that the game is fairly accessible now, and it can be even more accessible in the future. So I'm going to hand this over to Nicholas, who is going to talk more about how we actually went about like approaching all of our accessibility features by reaching out to the community.
Thank you for the introduction, Charles. Again, my name is Nicolas VanMeerten, and I am the Director of Insights and one of the founders at Glitch. And Glitch is a global collective of bold new voices building the future of playable media. So today, as Charles kind of hinted at, I'll be talking about the HyperDot A11Y campaign. And in a nutshell, it's an experimental research project that we completed last year to really delve into the accessibility features for HyperDot. Some of our goals for this project were to, of course, identify barriers that players faced with HyperDot, address those barriers with updates to the game so as many people as possible can enjoy the game. Really put a spotlight on the content creators who were a big part of making HyperDot A11Y happen. And of course, position HyperDot as a challenging yet accessible game, because those don't always go hand in hand. And some of the people that worked on this project are Cherry Ray Thompson. They are an accessibility consultant that worked on this project with us last summer. They led the recruitment for the study, did a lot of the data analysis for the study, and really helped to kind of guide us through the accessibility research pipeline. Holly Harrison, who was our marketing manager at the time, really coordinated the study from beginning to end and got everyone on the same page, in addition to kind of promoting all of this work we were doing. And then Ava Carr really kind of got us all on the same page at the beginning of the project and kind of set the strategy for the project. And of course, Charles, as you may expect, he implemented all of the changes, or the majority of the changes, according to the findings of this study. And then I did a lot of the research design, analyzed a lot of the data alongside Cherry Ray, and helped to prioritize updates for the development pipeline in HyperDot. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the design of the study. In formal academic terms, we performed a qualitative observational study. And the reason we chose that kind of design is that we were interested in observing people playing HyperDot with their own equipment in an environment where they really felt comfortable. We didn't want to have any artificial nature to this study, really. We also only partnered with content creators, so everybody was already kind of comfortable being in front of a camera and talking about how they're feeling. And then the second pillar of our study was to be transparent from beginning to end. We asked all of the content creators to post their reactions and gameplay to their channels. We also posted all of our findings publicly, and lastly posted our response and what we were going to do based on those findings for HyperDot. So the analysis for this study was fairly straightforward. It's a lot of watching the videos that our content creators made while playing HyperDot. Cherry and I were largely looking for barriers that those content creators were naturally encountering or that they're vocalizing while they're encountering them in the game. And then we just took notes about how often those types of things happened and tried to identify why they might be happening as well so we could approach the suggestions on how to fix them later on in a very authentic and well-informed way. We also collected some telemetry, so what different things were happening in the game while these content creators were playing, but we didn't end up using it. The qualitative kind of observational notes ended up being sufficient, and the analytics data didn't end up being as informative. As I mentioned earlier, one of the primary goals for this study was to identify barriers that players were encountering while playing HyperDot. And as you can see on the right-hand side here, we came up with a hefty little list of barriers that players were encountering. First off, it was button remapping. A lot of players were requesting the ability to move buttons around, or assign them to different controllers, etc., just to make it easier to play the game. There were some issues with the onboarding, so we wanted to make it clear how the game unlocks new levels, in addition to publishing tutorials and publishing a list of compatible input devices, since we didn't have that up and running yet, despite HyperDot being compatible with so many different types of input devices. The next thing had to do with settings. We wanted to make it easier to switch controllers around. There were some issues identified where you couldn't switch between a mouse and keyboard super easily. So we we identified this barrier with the settings. We also identified some problems with the user interface in terms of text legibility. The font size, or the font, was a little bit too thin to be seen at times. We also wanted to increase the visibility of markers on the menu so it's more clear what you're currently highlighting and selecting. And some iconography in the game also needed some updating, such as like the symbol for space. And there was also some issues with visuals, such as requests for a dark version of the high contrast mode, an option to disable the background animation because it was causing some issues for certain players being able to focus on the foreground and not be distracted by the background. Screen shake was a little disorienting to certain players, so there were requests to have the option to disable that. And There were also some issues with the dark mode in the game, which has a lot lower contrast, which made it a little bit more difficult for players that have low vision, and just wasn't as fun for them to play those levels. It was more frustrating than anything. So these were some of the bigger barriers that we identified. There were others, but these were kind of the ones that we decided to focus on. And so far, we have worked on updating the game to address a lot of these different barriers that people were encountering, including the onboarding, with making it more clear how you unlock more levels. We also published a list of compatible input devices that you can use, along with some updates to the user interface, such as increasing the visibility of what you're highlighting in the menus. Increasing text legibility is ongoing, just because you can't quite update all the text at once, but it is definitely much more legible than it used to be when it used to have a really thin font. And we've updated some of the iconography in the game by swapping out certain things like the word space for the key symbol to make it more clear what we're suggesting the player hit on their keyboard. And then we've improved some of the visuals, such as creating a dark version of the high contrast mode so that the white on your entire screen isn't so jarring, and an option to stop the background animation so that you can focus on the foreground, and an option to disable screen shake so that it's not more cognitive action on the screen, essentially. Our third outcome and our third goal was to really spotlight the content creators who helped us make HyperDot A11Y happen. And we really couldn't have done it without this set of people. This isn't even everyone that participated in the study, but each of their really unique experiences playing the game offered us a lot of insight into how what we thought was a really accessible game from the start of the study really highlighted how each player experiences a game so differently, and we really want to thank them for all of their time and all of their unique experiences. And our last goal, which was to position HyperDot as a challenging yet accessible game, really has two prongs to it. So we wanted to make sure the game was accessible, and I think Geeky Gimp's quote here is kind of indicative of her experience playing the game and how she really had a lot of respect for the way that we approached accessibility, and just goes to show that it's really important to make sure your game is accessible. And I hope more developers can use this model of testing out their game's accessibility in the future. We also received a lot of good reviews on the accessibility features within HyperDot, which is kind of an homage to, or like further evidence that this procedure and this type of study does improve the accessibility of your game. And the game did not become any less challenging. The game is super tough. When we had it at E3, even just getting through the 5 demo levels was extremely challenging. And recently we did a promotion with Toby, our whole campaign called I Challenge You, where they challenged players in their Ghost program to go through HyperDot and beat all 100 levels just using eye tracking. And throughout the whole campaign, there was only one person that could do it. And this is them with their Magneto just stare trying to finish the 100th level. So if if you're interested, go find that clip online. It's very entertaining to watch. And ultimately, I just want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to this talk, and feel free to reach out to any one of us with questions. And yeah, thank you again. Have a nice day.